Hi, everyone. Welcome to the series on the political economy of health in Europe. I'm your host, Carlos Muntaner from the University of Toronto. This series came about when having a conversation with my colleague and friend, Rick Wolf from NYU. He suggested it would be a great idea that we interviewed political economists about the situation in Europe and the prospects for its future, meaning after the COVID pandemic. And with Rosina Somani, also at the University of Toronto, we began to schedule interviews with some of the available and most interesting political economists that we found. A problem that we had and that we are working on it is that so far we were not able to interview women, economists, sociologists, or political scientists. But we hope that in the future we have some of them. I wanted to share with you that the analyses are overwhelmingly made by scientists, university professionals, with one exception, which is the sociologist that doubles as a politician, Carles Riera from the CUP party in Catalonia. His perspective, I think, is very fresh and kind of unique, based also on his unique insights into the political process. So without further ado, I leave you with these interviews. Please click the like if you do so, and send us your comments. So see you on the web, hopefully. Bye now. What do you think is the state of Europe during the COVID period, and what do you think will be after COVID, how it will evolve, and the problems that there may be and potential solutions? You don't need introduction for the majority of persons that may be interested in the video, but we want to reach a wider audience. So I'll ask you to introduce yourself briefly.
So my name is Goran Therborn. I'm a Swedish social scientist. I've had chairs of political science and of sociology. Primarily, I guess I'm a sociologist, although I've also been working on issues of social history. Now I'm officially retired and I've returned to Sweden. I was previously the professor of sociology at the University of Cambridge. And before that, I was co-director of the Swedish Collegium for Advanced Study in the Social Sciences at Uppsala. And over the years, I've published a number of books on a number of topics. The latest one is actually on democracy. It came out about 2 weeks ago, and it's called Inequality and the Labyrinths of Democracy.
Congratulations. I saw your your recent paper in New Left Review on the false middle class in the world of international development and
dreams and nightmares of the middle classes. Yes,
exactly.
Well, I've been working considerably on various issues of global inequality. Um, I have another recent paper on global inequality, which is uh, being peer reviewed in Beijing for publication later this year, early next year, I think. And a few years ago, I published a book on inequality, the killing fields.
Fields of inequality. I have
Yeah.
this one. Yes,
Ah,
I read.
all right. So, uh, what else have I done? Well, I've written about cities of power and of sex, gender, family relations in the world in the 20th century, and various other pieces on different aspects of the world.
Yes, a lot, really. And I remember I have books of you early on, but I can remember the name now, on different aspects of power or class or the ruling class.
Oh yes, yes.
What
I wrote a book about a what does the ruling
rule
class
class
do when it
so do when
rules?
it rules
Yes,
exactly.
yes.
That's the one I was uh, trying to remember. So it's so impressive, your amount of work. So it's a great honor to have you here with us. We would like to ask you these couple of questions about how you see the current moment in Europe in terms of political economy, and if, culture, if you wish, and the problems it has, and uh, finally, if you can see any solutions to the problems that Europe is facing.
The pandemic has brought home that Europe is in serious problems and is um probably facing a more or less unstoppable relative decline in the world. And uh, it's noteworthy that Europe has had a remarkably bad management of the pandemic, um, particularly if you compare it with the handling in East Asia, where it first started. It's true that since then, I mean the uh, the management of the pandemic in the United States and in many countries of Latin America has also been rather disastrous. Um, but with the exception of the non-Swedish Nordic welfare states, I don't think one can say that Europe has showed itself um, very capable in handling the crisis. And in the beginning of it, I mean, you had the nationalist panic. I mean, breaking out in Europe, where all the uh, rules of European cooperation, I mean, suddenly were forgotten, and it was a kind of free for all. And economically speaking as well, I mean, the the predictions of the IMF seem to show that Europe will be one of the major losers from the pandemic. So it's a um, it's a difficult situation. Uh, for Europe, I think.
Sociologically, how do you think it's going to evolve, or in terms of the unity of Europe, the potential for breakdown, the tensions between the say Germany and southern countries where the management has been uh, worse, like Spain, uh, of management of the COVID, that have the weaker welfare states. Uh, how do you think this is going to play out? Is it going to make it difficult, the political unity of Europe, or it would go towards a disintegration? And do you think that
It,
Europe, I'm sorry, please.
um, well, the pandemic was a severe test, and in the beginning, in the first weeks of the outbreak in Europe, I mean, there was panic everywhere. In the borders were closed, and states were competing with each other for scarce protective gear and all that. But later on, I mean, I think
You,
we have to acknowledge, I mean, that um Europe has uh, picked up itself, and in the negotiations uh, about a relaunch package after the COVID-19 between northern and southern Europe. I think Germany finally, I mean,
yeah,
showed some very constructive leadership, and because of that, there was an agreement,
yeah,
um, and uh,
there was a
on
lot
the
of opposition of the euro bonds at the beginning. It took a long time, but yes, uh, I I see what you're saying.
well, I mean, the Southern Europe didn't get everything it wanted, but I think on the whole, I mean, the fact uh, that Germany, for the first time
For the first
since
time.
the financial crash, came down, I mean, for a positive compromise with Southern Europe, I think was very, very important. The problem with that is, of course, that I think that they on Europe as well as on the world. I mean, it's the cool-headed and calm leadership of Angela Merkel, which um, has made played a very important role in uh, the uh, sort of balancing role played by Germany, and she's going to leave soon, and we don't know yet. I mean, what kind of uh, new leadership there will be in Germany? Will it? Uh, there are more um, classical fiscal conservatives and in the race for her successor, and more uh, and people with a more aggressive foreign policy agenda. So it's an open question, but on what will happen in a few years. But so far, I think after this disastrous opening in the handling of the pandemic, I think the European Union has done rather well. And
Well,
yeah,
well, well, but still, for example, yesterday one of the Italian cities or was asking support to Cuba to deal with the pandemic. Uh, uh, the level of cooperation between European countries is, let's say, not strong. Even if they learned uh, finally to handle the pandemic in conditions where the public health infrastructure is still uh, mm, lacking
Hmm. Yes.
sufficient uh, investment, let's say.
Yes, no, that's true. I mean, the healthcare system in Europe has all of Europe, with perhaps a few exceptions like Finland, Norway,
Yes,
and Denmark, has proved itself very much inadequate,
I see.
and uh, given the second wave of the pandemic now raging in Europe, I think there is no country um which has any uh, medical personnel to lend out. But it's a good thing. I mean that the Italians are turning to Cuba, and that Cuba Cuba has managed its um, corona outbreak quite well, and
Yes,
they have a large, very professional um, um,
uh,
core of doctors and other medical personnel. So
but
that's a
but
win-win situation for Italy and Cuba.
I agree. By the way, I have uh, uh, a wonderful book of yours in Spanish uh, on the comparison of Swedish and Cuban welfare state. Uh,
Hmm.
and
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yes. Oh, you have read quite a lot of me. Yeah.
and
Now that was a very interesting experience um, of working together with two Cuban researchers, and um, we had some tough debates occasionally, but on the whole, I mean, and in the end, it functioned extremely well, and I think we both learned quite a lot from that experience.
turning to Europe, and since you're a specialist in class and you've done some innovative work into uh, this area, uh, how do you think that the class structure of Europe in well, there's going to be variability among countries, but if you could say how is it going to evolve, if there are going to be some major changes, for example, is there going to be an expanded gig economy with uh, a semi-feudal relation through the internet, or the so-called precariat as a section of the working class? It's going to expand even more. And have you thought about this issue by any chance, about how it's going to play
Oh yes,
in Europe?
um, I've been thinking quite a bit about it, um, primarily on a global scale, but of course also on a European one. Well, first of all, I would say that I think the pandemic created its own class structure, um, which will have probably lasting effects. If we, for simplicity's sake, divide the class structure, the ordinary class structure, into three major classes. I mean, a bourgeoisie, a middle class, and a working class. During the pandemic, all three of them were divided into two sections, one privileged and one disadvantaged. On the one hand, you had in the business class, you had uh, people
Financial.
operating on the on the stock market and in the high tech industries, who were profiting enormously. I mean, from the pandemic, and on the other hand, you had uh, a large number of particularly small businesses in many countries, particularly in Southern Europe, I think. I mean,
Yes.
who basically went bankrupt. And in the middle class, you had on the one hand, I mean, people like you and me and so on. I mean, uh, professionals who can work from home. Um, we keep our jobs and our salaries and can work safely. Whereas on the other hand, this so-called service class of doctors and nurses and uh, food deliverers and other so-called frontline workers, I mean, had to uh, well, they kept their jobs and their income, but many of them, I mean, risking their lives and their health. And among the working class, you had particularly in Europe, you had on the one hand, I mean, the people who were formerly uh, permanently employed and who were now furloughed or on short-time work, keeping, well, taking a cut in their income, but nevertheless keeping at least a large part of it. And finally, you have the precariat. I mean, the temporarily employed and non-permanent employees before the crisis who now lost their livelihood. And so you have this triple divides, and I think this will have lasting effects. And um, I think we can expect that the so-called precariat will increase considerably after the uh, worst crisis, economic crisis, is over. There will be a kind of Amazonization of working conditions. There will be much more of this uh, gig economy where the employees are not even recognized as employees, but they are sort of always under surveillance and hard pushed by their digital employers and algorithms and so on. So this is uh, I think let's put it this way. I mean, before the outbreak of the COVID-19, Europe and the world as a whole had a couple of decades of increasing inequalities of various kinds. And all these inequalities and others have accelerated during the pandemic. And so the question is, what will happen then?
Is a kind of a grim prospect, but uh, it's it's a very insightful description, I think. And do you think, as a specialist in Sweden, for example, is it going to be similar in a strong welfare state? Even your article about the new Sweden, even if it's uh, mm, transitioning to a kind of liberal social welfare state, or a different kind from Norway, Finland, or Denmark? Or do you think it's going to go back to the way it was a few decades ago? How do you see the evolution and the class structure of Sweden?
Yes, I mean the general pattern I talked about. I mean, can be observed in Sweden too. I mean, this sort of triple division of classes, um, or and although countries in Europe, of course, differ in the uh, seriousness or the gravity of the problems. Um, the precariat uh, is much larger in the UK and in Spain than in Sweden, for instance.
See.
And um, with respect to the welfare state, the pandemic showed that this Swedish welfare state has lost uh, its aura, and uh, through privatizations and uh, new administrative divisions um, between municipalities and provinces or regions, as they now officially are called, the large number of elderly dead in Sweden was largely due to this um, disorganization of the care for the elderly. Um, when the crisis struck and the virus came ravaging, I mean, there's uh, no authority which took any overall responsibility for meeting it and managing it, and therefore so many um, uh, lives were lost. Um,
It seemed,
I'm yeah.
uh, in that case, it seems similar to Canada. It was a matter of lack of priority to deal with the elderly in the nursing homes,
Uh-huh.
or even in Catalonia, where I come from, it was ignored by the welfare state. It's
Mm.
like our system doesn't take care of nursing homes, and then uh, there was this very high mortality rate, about 2/3. I think in the first wave in Canada were in nursing homes, and so uh, I just was adding to your point. Sorry.
Yeah. There is a beginning discussion of a kind of um, what to do about this and so on, and there will probably be some amelioration. I mean, of this blatant disorganization of healthcare in Sweden, but it will be very difficult to change now because so much has been privatized, and so there's so much money involved, and so much profits involved in this privatization that it is difficult to find a political majority in Sweden. Currently, I mean, there's no parliamentary majority for a major uh, upgrading of the Swedish welfare state, um, and neoliberalism. I mean, had a stunning success in the in Sweden, and has actually rooted itself in the bourgeois parties, and for some time also
The
in parts
Social
of social
Democrats.
democracy. Democrats are now beginning to realize, I mean, that they were taken for a ride, but now it's late. And because of uh, the ethnic issue, which has suddenly become important in Sweden, like in other countries of Europe, because of immigration, the Social Democrats have lost uh, a large part of its working class support um, to what has become a
Yeah.
right wing party. So it's a
the
difficult, very difficult situation.
the Democratic Party. Uh,
Sorry.
was that the Democratic Party?
Uh, well, the Swedish social democracy has lost um, a significant part of its classical working class support to a right wing xenophobic party calling itself the Sweden Democrats.
Right. I'm sorry. That's
Uh,
the one I was thinking.
yeah.
And in other uh, talking about this move to right the wing, uh, is it going to succeed? You think in most of Europe, for example, in Spain, there is a new party that's uh, barely constitutional, but it's leading the opposition, at least in terms of the agenda. So even the Francoist uh, party that was traditional in the last 40 years the right-wing party that exchanged power with the socialist party, social liberal. Um,
Yes,
uh,
indeed.
so is is trying to compete with Vox. This yeah, I would say it's purely fascist. It praises Franco. It's xenophobic, anti-women. It's to a level not seen since the Franco's government. It's almost unbelievable that this party can succeed, and
Mm.
and it's capturing votes from the traditional right that was already very extreme for European averages, so to say, in the last 40 years. And it's posing a real threat to be in the government. Um, how do you think it's going to play in other places of Europe? This emergence of far right governments, maybe not so extreme as Vox, but um, something like the Swedish Democrats, the Finns in Finland, um, national uh, Le Pen party in France, uh, Salvini in Italy, and so on.
Well, it has become a major political phenomenon in almost all European countries. I mean, Spain was one of the last. Portugal is perhaps still uh, uh, free from it, but um, uh, well, I don't really see a possibility for these parties to take power in any of the Western European countries. Um, but what may happen, and what has already happened in several countries, is that they become part of the government of right wing right-wing governments. That has happened or the parliamentary coalition of the government. That has happened in Denmark, in Norway. Well, it's actually there in Norway today, and in Finland. It has happened in Austria, in the Netherlands, in Belgium, and of course in Italy. I think that's something we will have to live with. I mean, for some time. But the effects are rather different in different countries and so on. I mean, and although generally what they convey, of course, is a kind of is this xenophobic, racist. Uh, Smell and so on. I mean, which is infecting uh, European countries, and what is worrying in the longer run is not so much that these parties will be able, I mean, to take power on their own or dominate a government, but that they may become significant in a more um, what I was saying is that I think the real danger with these xenophobic parties is if the international geopolitics becomes more uh, hostile and violent because of the uh, relative decline of
United
the
States.
North Atlantic area and the rise of Asia and China. If there will be a kind of a, a Euro-American Cold War and perhaps even a hot war against China, then you will find these sort of right-wing parties they as really beating, I mean, the war drums. That could become very ugly, kind of. Uh, uh, Although we are not there yet, but it's a prospect.
And the relation with Russia of Europe, how is it going to play?
I haven't thought that much of it, but I do think that the the European relations, I mean, with Russia could calm down. Again, I mean, Germany has here played a very constructive role, I think. A key thing to look out for is, of course, if Germany, under American pressure, cancels the already almost ready Nord Stream pipeline, that will, of course, increase tensions with Russia considerably, and uh, there's nothing, I mean, for Europe to gain from increasing these tensions by doing so, but there is a current within the German Christian democracy which is in favor of it and so on. And if the new US government continues the Trumpist pressure on Germany to cancel the pipeline and so on, I mean, there might be a break of normal relations between Europe and Russia.
Is there a possibility of an alliance between Russia's military might and China's emerging technological superiority?
Well, I think the Russian leadership is realizing that their best chance, I mean, to survive in the world uh, as a major, although secondary, big power, is to align itself with China, and I think they will do that. There have been uh, tendencies in that direction already, and there, as far as I can see now, I mean, there are no direct areas of tension between Russia and China, and Russia is realizing that it's now the little brother rather than the big brother it once was.
And the evolution of the European welfare states that you were mentioned, do you think that there's going to be a realignment from the Esping-Andersen type three worlds in Europe? Or do you think that this type of framework is going to have minimal change and that still there will be a Scandinavian social democratic superiority over Christian democratic continental occupation based, and then the liberal UK and North America and the ex-fascist minimal welfare or lesser welfare state of Mediterranean?
Well, I think, I mean, that the Scandinavian social democratic welfare states have shown themselves to be uh, the most adequate kind of welfare states in existence. Not necessarily optimal or ideal, but nevertheless, I mean, better than the others. They and I think the successful management of the pandemic by Denmark, Norway, and Finland will underline that. A problem is Sweden is the problematic case because of the extraordinary inroads which Anglo-Saxon neoliberalism has made in Sweden. And Sweden is increasingly becoming a kind of a hybrid case of a welfare state, with an educational system increasingly driven by international corporations for profit, and with this overall large-scale privatizations of all kinds of care. But well, here's I would like to take up an issue which is tangential to this, which is that there is an interesting phenomenon in the world, in Europe, but not only in Europe, also to some extent even in North America, which is what I've called an egalitarian enlightenment, in the sense that there is an awareness among a large number of economists, including several recent Nobel laureates, Abiyet Banerjee, Esther Duflo, Joe Stiglitz, Angus Deaton, and before them Amartya Sen. And there is an awareness, even in the IMF and the World Bank, about that inequality and the rising inequality in the world is a major social problem, and it is rising also now with the COVID-19. The chairman of the World Bank, I mean, has called a COVID-19 the inequality pandemic, and the director of the World Economic Forum, I mean, Klaus Schwab, has argued for a major transfer of income from capital to labor. And you could go on. I mean, there is among a large group of social scientists and leaders of international organizations, not only UNDP, but also nowadays even in important sections of the IMF and the World Bank, there is a
Yeah.
concern with inequality, which has unfortunately, I mean, no proper resonance among politicians. I mean, there's no or hardly any single strong, organized, egalitarian political force anywhere in the world and in Europe. Um, Now, this egalitarian establishment may have some kind of impact, or at least on social policy in some countries. And they may also, I mean, and that's of course my big hope. I mean, they might be able to connect with egalitarian social movements in some countries and create the necessary turmoil in order to make any social change. But I think we should be aware of this fact that neoliberalism as an ideology is on its way out. What will come after it, I mean, is still an open question. And there is no clear and organized progressive alternative in politics anywhere. But there is a kind of intellectual ferment, um, I think, which one can see in certainly in parts of Europe and probably also in parts of Canada and so on. And perhaps you saw the Financial Times had an editorial on the 3rd of April calling for necessary radical reforms and
Yes,
redistribution and taxation
that
and,
was
and,
in.
and all this sort of taboo things of neoliberalism. Uh, but again, it's still only an intellectual enlightenment. If you look at British politics, um, after Brexit crushed Labour, I mean, there's no uh, progressive politics in sight in Britain for several years.
The solution doesn't seem to be uh, um, taking form yet. Uh, what
Right, that's the problem.
and since you mentioned anywhere in the world, um, what do you think of well, there are some countries that are governed by parties with uh, left wing, I would say, egalitarian ideology in Latin America. And then I don't know what you think about the evolution of the formerly communist Asian countries. If they are going, there is any possibility that they become more egalitarian, such as China, Vietnam, uh, or in Latin America, I was thinking, of course, Cuba, number one, but also Venezuela, Bolivia, uh, and uh, Chile has an open uh, road now towards changing the constitution, and has a vibrant left that is in the coalition and outside, and the people are mobilized. Uh, I don't know. You see around the world any uh, uh, positive examples?
Well, Latin America, I think, is the has again, I mean, become at least partly a a continent of hope. Uh, in the first dozen years of this century, Latin America was the only part of the world in which inequality was coming down, was cut down, and but then the the so-called pink tide turned, and we had
Crisis.
the very right-wing development in Brazil. Uh,
Yes.
Again, it seems to be changing back to more progressive. We don't know yet. I mean, what will be the outcome of the important governments in Mexico and Argentina? I mean, it doesn't look extremely uh, promising right now, but I mean, they are committed. I mean, to egalitarian social change, and we shouldn't forget, of course. I mean, the only really good political news in for a long time, the recent elections in Bolivia.
Bolivia. Yes.
I mean, Bolivia was the most successful of the egalitarian regimes in Latin America. It was the most successful in two respects. One was that uh, it made the largest reduction of the enormous inequality in Bolivia, but it was in size comparable. I mean, to the reduction of inequality in Sweden. I mean, from the 1930s to 1970. Um, and secondly, it was a country of stable economic growth. And before the Morales regime was ousted, it was actually, I mean, the country with the highest economic growth in the whole of Latin America. And now the movement to socialism has returned to power with an even larger majority. I think this is a very good sign. The situation is more difficult in other parts of the world. There is a debate in China about inequality, and there is some kind of an egalitarian enlightenment among Chinese intellectuals and certain scholars too. But and inequality is no longer rising. It's at least stabilized and has even been cut down marginally since its uh, peak 8 to 10 years ago. Um, but there's still no commitment to an egalitarian turn. Uh, it remains a potential, both in China and in Vietnam, but uh, there are no signs yet. And for the rest of Asia, there has been a radical rise of inequality in recent years. Even countries which uh, in their growth periods were relatively egalitarian by the modest standards of the world. I mean, Japan, South Korea, Taiwan have had large rises of inequality. And India is becoming a kind of Asian United States in the sense that it's the country with the highest inequality, most rapidly rising inequality, and a kind of and the largest gaps between a the highly educated and very privileged, a very rich elite, and dismal poverty of the poor. Um, and now it's also, I mean, fueled by Hindu
nationalism.
chauvinism and so on. So it's a very ugly development. It's a kind of can be very
Yes.
ugly indeed. In Africa, I mean, it's difficult to see any real positive signs. South Africa has so far been a large disappointment. Uh, I've been working in South Africa a bit for in recent years, and I found to my surprise this was figures from 2016, 2017 that income inequality in South Africa then and probably also today is actually larger now than it was in the last years of the apartheid.
Yes,
I mean,
it's
it's
the highest
incredible.
in the world almost, right? It's one of the highest
Yes,
in the
yeah, it
world.
is. It's the highest in the world. Yeah, right.
Yes.
So those of us, I mean, who are uh, committed to equality and giving every person a chance to develop and live a good life. I mean, we have uh, no risk of becoming unemployed.
That's that's true. Ironically, it's true that as it's similar to what sometimes I mentioned that some of the predictions of the uh, say some Marxian texts are becoming true in spite of the desire that this reality doesn't unfold that way. So it's like a bitter success, knowing
Hmm.
that you've been right all along, but that exactly what's happening is the opposite of what you would like to see happening. Uh,
Yes.
the global inequality. Thank you so much. You've been extremely generous with your time, and uh, it's been fantastic to hear your well meet you finally after so many years and hear and you talking about your ideas and sharing them with us. It's been an extraordinary honor, and um, and we thank you so much for it.
Awesome.
Uh, Once we have the video ready, we'll share it with you, and so you can see it before. And we are so grateful, Dr. Thurborn.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, and so on. I mean, this has been a great pleasure and an important conversation. And of course, I'm uh, very happy. I mean, to meet directly, or at least uh, with digital directness,
Yes. Through
a,
pixels.
a major scholar. I mean, who has also been one of my readers and so on. I mean, so
Oh,
it's a great
very.
pleasure and a great honor meeting you and taking part in your series. And thank you, Rosina. I mean, for organizing this and for your patience with. Okay, take care, all of you.
Okay,
Thank you
bye.
so much.
Thank you,
Hope
sir.
to
Thank you.
talk to you again.
Yeah. Oh, bye.
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 Take care.